Today we're going to look at Giocoso, opus 599, number 12, by Czerny and accompaniment by Ner, so that would be the teacher part on the opposite page. So this is a primo of a two-part duet, and just so you know, Czerny was a student of Beethoven, and actually Czerny taught a number of students, including an entire lineage that leads to yourself. So you were taught by someone who was taught by someone who was taught by someone who was taught by someone named Czerny, who was taught by Beethoven. So kind of a fun fact. So he wrote a lot of etudes, which are studies for students, and just some great pieces. This one in particular, I'm hoping will be kind of a quick study for you. It's not overly difficult, kind of similar to what we did at the end of level 2. However, the main difference is that we are doing full triads in the left hand. So this is when we're starting to see our technically 6 chord progression that we learned a little bit of in the last couple weeks. We're starting to see how that fits into our actual repertoire. So before we look at this piece any further, I just want to kind of recap our 4 chord progression. So this one is in your technique book, so you can open it up to the 4 chord progression. I don't remember what page number, I'm sorry. I don't believe we wrote it in, and my book is different than yours, but it's the C major chord progression, so you can find that in your book. It'll be after the triads in inversions that we learned. And here's how it goes. So I'll start with just the right hand. So we start with our C chord, which is our home or tonic or 1 chord. 1 meaning it's based on the first note of the C major scale, which is our key. Next chord is the 4 chord, also known as F, or the subdominant. Now the reason it's an F chord is because it's inverted. So if we take the C from the bottom, put it to the top, we can see that that makes skip, skip, skip. So that's an F chord there. However, we play it here just because it's a smoother sound and it's easier to play. So that's why we invert the F chord when we're playing this chord progression. Then we return back to our home chord, or tonic, or our 1 chord, which is C. Then we go to our 5 chord, or G chord, or dominant chord. All of those are different terms that kind of mean the same thing, but they kind of tell us different information about the chords. So the reason we call it G chord is because, once again, this is an inversion. If we uninvert it, take the G from the top, stick it at the bottom, that puts our chord in root position, therefore it is a G chord, because the G is on the bottom. So that's why we call it a G chord. We also call it the 5 chord because G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is the 5th note of our scale of C major, which is the key we're in currently. And it's called the dominant chord because in music, dominant refers to the chord of tension before we release. The next chord is similar to the G chord. It's called a G7 chord. So this is when we take the middle note and we switch to the finger 4 on the F. So we play B, F, G. The big friendly giant chord, B, F, G. And the reason it's called a G7 chord is, once again, this chord is inverted. If we take the G from the top, stick it to the bottom. Now you're probably wondering, well, that's actually not completely in skips. That F is way up high, so how do we know that's root position? Well, the answer is it's actually supposed to be this. So it's actually supposed to be skip, 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 with the D there. We often just leave the D out to make it easier to play and to make the chord a little bit of a clearer sound versus. And as you can tell, it doesn't really change the sound of the chord doing that. However, if we had done it with a different note, for example, if we went or that one's borderline, maybe that one you could use, but for the most part you need the other notes of the chord. However, the D is kind of optional with the sound in this case. So this is a G7 chord. Once again, we've inverted it to play it in this progression. Once again, that just makes it sound smoother as we transition between the chords, and it also makes it easier to play. Now after our BFG chord, our G7, also known as a dominant 7 because it's the G, which is our dominant, and it's got a 7th. Now I should mention, why is it called a 7th? Because the 7th is the interval up from the bottom of the chord. So if it's a G chord and it has a 7th in it, that's the interval of 7th. That's a 7th chord. So you have to put it back in root position information that you don't have to worry about too much. I just want to make sure that you have a little bit of background going into this song. And then after the BFG chord, we return to C major. Okay, so let's play that one more time, no more explanations. C, F, C, G, G7, C. You could also say tonic, C dominant, tonic, dominant, dominant 7, tonic. And with the left hand, same idea. Let's try it just with the left. Now, I do like to show you on Classroom Maestro because sometimes it's just easier to see. You'll be able to see the notes light up. So I'm just going to show that to you one more time with the left hand. C chord, F chord, C chord, G chord, G7, C. Okay, so we'll try it one more time. Hands together. C chord, continue practicing this week in your technique book. I don't believe we've tried it hands together yet, so if you're feeling confident with it, you could put it hands together potentially. Just watch the fingering, especially as you're inverting the chord. So for example, from here to here, read the fingering very carefully. In the G chord in the right hand, for example, we don't use our third finger in the middle of the chord. We use our 2 just because it's more comfortable. And then we use our 4, and left hand we use our 2 to play the F chord. Again, it's just the spacing just makes it more comfortable, and then we're not stretching our hand as much, so it means that our hand will get less tired and less tense, and it'll play more fluently. So watch out for the fingering in your technique book and follow that very carefully. Oh, and there's Dolly barking. Okay. So now we're going to look again at the actual sheet music. So let's pull this up again on the screen. Now, let me see. I didn't look up the page number. Let me see. Oh, okay, page 26 and 27. I'll write that down quick before I forget. Page 26 and 27 in your book. So you can open up your Piano Safari repertoire book to 26, 27. We'll be looking at the 27th page because page 26 is the teacher duet. All right, and now we're going to do some coloring on the score. So I would like to mark the treble clefs this time with you because notice that they are in both hands. So actually, let's make this full screen if I can. Sorry, give me one sec here. There we go. View, full screen, just so we don't have to scroll down. Nope. It is not wanting to cooperate, is it? Okay, apparently no full screen for us. I will have to just shrink it a little bit, so my apologies, it'll look kind of teeny for you. All right, so treble clefs, we're going to mark them red for right hand, except we're not actually using our right hand for this whole thing. Okay, so, but just so you remember, these are all up high. A lot of classical pieces written for elementary students are written in the treble clef, just because it gives that light, airy classical sound that composers at the time enjoyed. Okay, so now that we've marked that, we're going to mark in our starting notes. So the right hand is going to start with finger 1 on treble C. And then in the left hand, we're going to be putting finger 5 on middle C. So we're both starting on C, and the other notes you can just kind of figure out from the finger 5. So if 5 is on C, that means we're also using fingers 3 and 1. Then let's go through now and mark all of the chords in the left hand. Actually, I should probably use a blue. Make that a little bit less ambiguous. Okay, so we're going to do another C chord here. And then you can see here it switches to a different chord. So this is actually a great exercise. Can we just look at this and identify if it's our F chord or G chord? Which one is it out of those, that 4-chord progression? So actually, sorry, I keep calling it that. It's a 6-chord progression because we play a few of them twice, but that's okay. So right here, what we look at is if there is a larger gap than a skip, then we know that it's inverted. Okay, so we're looking at this, we see a 4th at the top, that means it's inverted. Now, if you see the 4th at the top of the chord, that means it's in first inversion. And what that means is that we've taken the bottom note and we've bumped it up to the top of the chord. So we've taken the bottom and bumped it to the top. So that's first inversion. So anytime you see a 4th at the top, first inversion. And that also means that because we took the root from the bottom and bumped it to the top, that the top note is our root note, which is the name of the chord. So I hope you follow that. Okay, so check for 4th. The 4th is at the top. That means the bottom note was taken and put at the top. And the bottom note names the chord when it's in root position. So this is our top note here, is the root note and names the chord. I know that's a little bit complicated, so that's okay. If it doesn't quite click, that's all right. We're going to call it a G chord. However, because it's inverted, we use what we call a slash chord. So we also write in the bass note of the chord. So what is the lowest note of this chord here? Right now it's a B. It's a step below middle C. So we say it's a G chord, but B is on the bottom, so that's a G/B chord. Then we go back to a C major. Notice it's all in skip, so we know that the bottom note is the root, names the chord. Once again, C major, C major. Now, again in the middle, this is where it is not in root position. We've got a 5th here. Okay. Why on earth is there a 5th in the middle of our chord? Well, that is usually a good indication it's a 7th chord. Because remember how we had that one note that we left out of the 7th chord? That is what we're seeing here. So once again, it is inverted because we have a step here. We don't normally see steps in chords. So we're going to take that G that's at the top of the chord, we're going to put it to the bottom, and that would put it in root position. Therefore, this is also in first inversion. So this one is also a G chord. It is a G7 chord. And once again, the bottom note is B, so it's a G7/B. If you're not quite following, that's okay. Make sure that you've written your chords down on your technique chord progression, and as you're playing your technique chord progression, read those chord symbols because it'll help you translate that into this piece. Next we go to a C chord, and then this one you might recognize. Once again, we have a 4th at the top of the chord. The G is at the top, which means that it used to be at the bottom. So that is a G chord in first inversion, so B on the bottom. Back to a C chord. Once again, G chord with C on the bottom, and a C chord, C chord, C chord. Okay, this one we've seen again. It's our G7/B, and that's played twice, and then we return to C. Okay, so once you've gotten all that written on, we are going to play those chords on the piano. So with your left hand, finger 5 on middle C, we're going to play a C chord twice. Now keep the top note on the G and move the bottom 2 notes down. That's our G chord. Because remember, there's a G chord, there's G chord in first inversion. So C chord, G chord, C chord. 2 more C chords. Here's our G7. So once again, root position for G7 would be this. Technically, it would have all 4 of these notes in it, but we often leave out the D, like I said earlier, for clarity and for comfort. So it's this chord, G, B, F, inverted to B, F, G. So that's our G7. And it's called G7 because G is on the bottom in root position, and it has the interval of a 7th in it. G to F is a 7th. And there's our inversion. So it's a G7/B, because B is on the bottom. Okay, back to C. So I'm going to play the first 2 lines one more time, no more talking. C, C, G/B, C, 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 G7/B, and C. Okay, now we just alternate between those chords that we've already discussed. G/B, C, G/B, C, 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 G7/B, and C. All right, so all I want you to do is play the song hand separately this week. So just practice that left hand. Make sure you've got the fingering correctly. I should mention briefly maybe what the fingering would be. That would be correct. So let's maybe write it in for at least one time for each chord. So the first chord would be 1 through 5. Sorry, you have to imagine that's actually written next to those notes. Okay, and then this would be finger 1 at the top, and then finger 3 and 5. So it's actually the same fingering. And then it's all just the same. So like you could write them all in if you want to. Probably don't need all these. Okay, this one is the different one. It's the 1, 2, 5, just because we have that kind of pinched chord, we call it, at the top, with this, the F and the G. And then the rest is the same, so you could just copy from before, but 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1, 3, 5. Okay, so that's all the left hand fingering, and you, like I said, you can write that all in. If that's useful, just pause the video and copy it down. Okay, so now we're going to look at the right hand, and we're just going to learn hand separately, so we're just looking at the right hand separate to the left hand for now. Let's grab a highlighter, and we're going to mark skips in this piece, just because there's a lot of moving around, changing direction in the melody. I always find it's useful in those cases to mark skips. Probably should make that highlighter a little bit less big. There we go. So that is all the skips in the right hand. So once again, pause the video, find all the skips, and then you can check your work by looking at the screen as it's paused here. Okay, and then the last thing I want to do looking at the right hand before we try it is just identify some of the rhythm patterns. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit for this. I don't know if you remember this one, but your sister is learning it right now. It's Zechariah Zebra. So that is very useful for getting the rhythm right in the song. It's much better than counting tas and titis because we're seeing the rhythm more as a whole group. So I want you to write in these. You don't have to write them all in, but write in the first one at least, and then anytime it's different. So this would be Zechariah Z because it just holds. And then right here in line 2, we would call that Zechariah, Zechariah. It just repeats the Zechariah. And then Zechariah Zebra. Oops, drop it down. There. And then once again, Zechariah, Zechariah, Zechariah Z. Okay, now let's look at lines 3 and 4. Zechariah, 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 Zebra. And Zechariah, 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 Zebra. And then it's just all Zechariah, 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 Zechariah until Zechariah Z. Okay, so you don't have to write them all in, but do write in the ones that are different than the others. And I do want you to say those rhythm patterns in your head as you're playing, just to help keep you steady. I didn't mark the staccatos with you, but if you want, that would be the last thing we could possibly highlight as well. I'll leave that for now. But just remember that when you see a curved line over the notes, that means to play legato or smooth, and the little dots over the notes means to play it bouncy or staccato. Okay, so we start on treble C. Zechariah Zebra, Zechariah Zebra, Zechariah Zebra, Zechariah Z, Zechariah, Zechariah, Zechariah Zebra, Zechariah, Zechariah, Zechariah Z, Zechariah, Zechariah, Zechariah Zebra, Zechariah, Zechariah, Zechariah Zebra, Zechariah, 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 Zechariah Zebra. that's a lot of fancy finger work, pretty fast finger work. So start off slow, make sure you see all the changes of direction, just kind of study the melody ahead of time. Look at one phrase at a time. For example, I would look at 2 measures, practice them in your head, play. Look at 2 measures, practice them in your head, play, and so forth. And that's how I would practice the right hand. All right, so that is it for Giocoso. So you can try that hand separately this week. By the way, I forgot to mention at the beginning of this video, Giocoso is an Italian word that means lively, joyous, and playful. So you can kind of think Giocoso kind of looks like joke, Giocoso almost, so it's kind of like a joke kind of sounding one. All right, so we will leave it there, and good luck.